So we will be tackling and resolving the is-ought question together, how to put them together, and this should just be the done with it then. So, you know,
about a half hour.
log
we're
in,
out of
half
here.
hour, we're done with it, and you know, what the hell's complicated about that?
So am I permitted to share my screen?
I believe I made you a co-host, yes.
Okay, so let me do that. I will do this and share that. And I will admit him, and I'm going to do a slideshow from the beginning. So you guys got the screen? Good. So thank you for inviting me to speak about seeking real good. Before beginning, I want to mention that all the material I'm using today is freely available from Wikiversity. As we will see, an important part of seeking real good is to advance no falsehoods. So if you catch me trying to advance falsehoods, stop right there, stop me right in the tracks. Let's go over it. Let's make sure you understand it. If you disagree with it, let's discuss it then. But I do, I especially like the last 4 slides, numbered 29 through 32. So we'll keep an eye on the time and we'll give a chance to do that. So the purpose of today's talk is to persuade you that seeking real good can make the world a better place. I suspect that many of you are already seeking real good throughout your lives. Nonetheless, I hope you'll find the talk interesting and will learn some new way to think about seeking real good, or find some new way to explain the importance of real good to others. Are you seeking real good? Is there any better way to spend your time if you want the most out of your life? If you are early in your career, is there any more worthwhile pursuit? If you're a parent or a grandparent, is there a better way to pass on a good world to your children and grandchildren? Would you rather argue in favor of real bad or fake good? Do you want to live wisely? Humans have long been fascinated by 2 fundamental questions. What is real? And as Rob points out, that's the question of is, or how does the world work? And what is good? What ought we to do? How should I conduct myself? Exploring these questions independently often leads to polarization based on a false dichotomy. Scientists traditionally examine evidence in their pursuit of reality. However, their investigations may become narrowly focused, and they're sometimes accused of abandoning human values and other concepts of the good. Creative optimists, including storytellers, artists, theologians, mystics, and dreamers, often suspend reality to better imagine and convey a sense of good. Fortunately, there are reliable ways we can determine what is real and what is good, and we can have both. Investigators determine what is real by examining reality, facing facts, evaluating evidence, seeking true beliefs, thinking scientifically, exploring worldviews, being intellectually honest, knowing how they know, and choosing their beliefs. Also, we're guided towards the good by flourishing, focusing on what matters, the golden rule, human dignity, human rights, facing the grand challenge, and moral reasoning. We'll examine the various ways we can determine what is real and what is good that we see listed here. So we start off with the burning question of how tall is the Eiffel Tower? Can the height of the Eiffel Tower be known? How might it be determined? We can consult references, we can ask a friend, we can go there and measure in various ways. But we can be confident that it has a height. And reliable methods to determine that height will result in a series of increasingly accurate estimates converging towards that actual height. Reliable epistemologies, ways of knowing, will converge on matters of fact. And a lack of convergence casts doubt on the reliability of those methods used. Pursuing such discrepancies can lead to an important insight about the reliability of the methods that we've used. And agreeing to disagree on matters of fact is a decision to accept complacency and incoherence. Any questions at this point? Okay. You might hear me use the word consilience later on. Consilience is the expectation that any which way you measure the height of the Eiffel Tower, you should get a compatible result. So it's the expectation that pursuing many avenues of evidence will converge on an insight about reality. Facing facts. This is a famous image taken during the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. The protester must face the fact that overwhelming military force is now being used to forcibly suppress the student-led demonstrations. Simultaneously, the military commanders must face the fact that the students are firmly resolved in their resistance. They all must embrace reality. Reality exists, and we live in the real world. We can explore, investigate, examine, observe, measure, and probe that real world. You and I and everyone we know or will ever meet all live in the same universe. And the most certain of all basic principles is that contradictory propositions are not true simultaneously. It's important to distinguish among matters of fact, matters of controversy, and matters of preference when describing and discussing reality and uncertainty. Matters of fact correspond to reality and can generally be determined by an accurate investigation of reality. Differences are best resolved through research. Ask an expert. Matters of controversy are neither facts nor opinions. Differences are best explored through dialogue. Ask a philosopher or a Supreme Court justice. And with matters of taste, preference, or opinion, any claim is acceptable. Reasonable people know there's no correct answer. Have fun and enjoy the differences. Fake news attempts to mix these up and present facts as controversy and controversy as facts. We all live on planet Earth. Because we all live on the same Earth and the same universe, reliable knowledge about our world must converge toward a consistent description of that world. Each phenomenon we observe must fit into a single, coherent, and integrated description of our universe. Because we all live in the same universe, as we continue to examine our universe more and more closely, the set of facts about our universe we can agree to continues to grow larger. Our common ground increases and we become less polarized. Reliable epistemologies, ways of knowing, increase our shared common knowledge. Reality is our shared common ground. It's good to resolve disagreements by examining reality more closely and more carefully. Each piece of evidence is one piece of some larger puzzle. It's our responsibility to determine what puzzle the evidence belongs to, how it fits into that puzzle, what portion of the reality puzzle it represents, and what insight it reveals. As we encounter evidence, we need to ask, what does this evidence convey about reality? Is the information being conveyed true? Does it tell me more about the observer or what is being observed? How representative is this? To what extent can I draw more general conclusions from this data point? How do we best evaluate evidence? Reality is vast, complex, and dynamic. And despite extensive and ongoing exploration, discovery, and research efforts, the total collection of all existing evidence represents only a small fraction of our universe. For evidence to be readily available, it has to appear in some form, in some place that is reasonably accessible. Accessible repositories of evidence are finite and are necessarily curated. Someone or something selects what is contained in each collection and what is omitted. Censorship in many forms prevents access to various evidence. When you are young, much of what we learned is based on evidence selected by us, for us by others. Cultural influences determine the languages we learn, the customs we're taught, the traditions we uphold, the behaviors we observe, what is taught in schools, the ethics that are espoused and practiced, and the ideologies we value. As we get older, we have more opportunities to select the evidence we study. A personality trait called openness to experience becomes important. Each of us has some approach to discovery, exploration, study, learning, inquiry, assessment, and verification. Together, these can be called our individual research methods. Our approaches will determine what questions we choose to explore, what evidence we seek out, how gullible or skeptical we are regarding various forms of evidence, what we decide is true or false, and what we choose to believe or reject. A recursive or positive feedback loop exists between our current beliefs and our confirmation biases that creates and sustains our worldview. In each such case, new evidence bears the burden of overcoming presently held beliefs. We will explore this in more depth a bit later. Any questions on this? This diagram illustrates how we can seek true beliefs and become excellent in our quest for knowledge. Reality exists. If you take time to open the door before passing through, you're betting that reality exists. True beliefs are beliefs that correspond to reality. The intellectual virtues are motivations towards true beliefs. A virtue is a deep and lasting acquired excellence that's been deliberately developed over time. Our motivations draw on various skills, which are techniques, methods, and practices, such as reading, observing, investigating, and evaluating evidence. Skills draw on natural faculties. Attaining true beliefs is as much a matter of will as it is of skill. We choose our beliefs. We can decide to seek true beliefs. We have a moral obligation to choose true beliefs, and it's good to embrace reality as our common ground. As I mentioned, each intellectual virtue is a motivation towards true belief. I'll just go through them, mention them quickly. Love of knowledge, firmness. Galileo was firm, but the Pope was rigid. Courage and caution, overcoming difficulty. Humility, a readiness to learn new things. Autonomy, choosing what to believe and what to study. Perseverance, digging deeper, going to the next question, going to the next piece of evidence. Generosity, sharing what you know and learn, and openness to invite others. Insightfulness, learning some new cause and effects. And practical wisdom is balancing and integrating all of these things.
Lee, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
I'm real sorry to slow you
No
down.
problem.
So you're calling these virtues?
Intellectual virtues, correct.
And so, are these yours? Did you pull them from somewhere? Is this?
So there's two primary references. Wood is the name of the first one, and Linda last initial Z is the second one.
Got it.
It comes from, I think it was, the original definition of knowledge was justified true belief.
Mm-hmm.
And people have had trouble with that, or at least philosophers have had trouble with that. What is justification? Is the word true belief redundant with respect to, is justified true, redundant with respect to what is true, and so on. So, and there's something called Gettler problems, which is basically getting lucky and getting it right. Yeah. So what these two philosophers recommend, or their definition of knowledge is, it is what someone who is very skilled at the intellectual virtues would come to believe.
So how do you distinguish a true belief versus truth?
Truth is a language statement.
Mm-hmm.
The cat is on the mat if the cat is on the mat, okay? Truth corresponds to reality. So, and knowledge is a collection of true statements or facts about the world. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to me, like, belief is an assuredness of meaning.
Right.
Right. So I feel it's true, whether it is or isn't. Right.
Right.
So are these pointing toward truth or just correct beliefs, or is that how you mean it?
We can see on the slide that they're pointing towards true beliefs.
Got it.
And the assertion of those philosophers, and I've kind of, was persuaded by them, or I would not have included here, is that if you are excellent in these motivations, mm-hmm. and you are skillful in your research, what you come to believe is what we're going to regard as true.
That's interesting. Okay. I will think on that. Thanks.
Yeah, if you go to my Wikiversity course called Seeking True Beliefs, it has the references up, down, and sideways.
Cool.
So that's all out there. Just go to Wikiversity Seeking True Beliefs, and you'll read more than you need to know
awesome.
About this stuff here.
Thanks, man.
So That's that. But I just want to emphasize, I stopped at the slide and nobody said it. The statement, you choose your beliefs, People often disagree with me with that. Is everybody okay with that?
You choose some of your beliefs.
Yeah, I think
I would certainly not choose to say you choose all your beliefs, but
yeah.
Can you identify a belief that you hold that you did not choose?
many, because, well, it depends on what we mean by belief, but I have
Right.
many different, both schema and statements about the world, okay, that I didn't, that never entered into my deliberative structure, and that I chose one way or the other. In terms of, I mean, I think about all the beliefs I was raised on.
Right.
I didn't choose those beliefs. Those were,
Hopefully you've overcome some of those.
well, hopefully, but they, but I was grown in a socialized soil where I
Right.
was told I had no frame of reference, and those things get baked into my structure, and then they become all part of the
Something you argue deeply for without ever really even knowing you took on, right? Like
many of it would be
they
sure
become true to you. Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but at some point I may ask you to cite an example of a belief that you hold today that you do not choose to believe.
May I comment?
Sure.
It seems to me that we have the capacity to choose our beliefs,
Right.
and that the operation of that capacity is part of our rights as human beings.
Right.
But it is not assured that all of our beliefs are of our own free choosing,
Correct.
or perhaps even any.
Okay. So you'll notice one of our intellectual virtues is autonomy, and it says choosing what to believe. Okay. So,
Can I comment?
Yeah.
In addition to the issues that have just been raised, another issue is what does it mean to choose?
Right.
We don't have very good theories of what it means to choose, and the very notion of autonomy and free will are highly contested.
Right.
So the idea that anything that I choose autonomously is a deeply problematic notion, in my opinion.
Okay. I spend more hours than I care to admit listening to Sam Harris debate with anybody who will talk to whether or not free will exists. So I've heard some of that, and I think a little bit to Gregg's point. There's stuff you're taught as a kid, and it's just not worth revisiting. There are things that you've told tentatively that you may not have gotten to the bottom of, and all those kind of things. All right.
Lee, one more thing. I'm sorry
Sure.
to just bring
No,
it
go
up.
ahead.
A couple of beliefs come up to me, or things that I don't know that you would call them beliefs, but come up for me. So, I'll often work with a client who has a deep sense of I'm not enough
Right.
going on. They see it. It's very hard for them to unchoose, right?
Right.
Like it's a lot of work on our end to get them past that,
Correct.
get a sense
Am I
of
worthy?
worthiness and shift that belief system. So that's one that's like, they can even see it. And once they see it, it's very difficult to choose a different thing.
Yeah.
And then another one, oftentimes I can talk about like how much money people want to make, and we'll hit a level that's not fully conscious to them, but it's deeply uncomfortable for them. It feels like totally unreal, or it'll be too difficult to maintain that or whatever. And that's not like fully conscious, but they very clearly have kind of a preference or maybe a comfort zone of how much money they feel they deserve or they could make or whatever, right? So
Right.
Those are just a couple of different like dimensions of beliefs where it's not super easy to just choose them at our whim, and also that many of them aren't fully conscious.
Yeah, and that's good. And if you ask somebody who worries, am I doing enough? Do you believe you're doing enough? They would say, well, I try to believe that. My counselor says I should believe that, and we know that unconsciously it's hard to do, and so on. So at least you can kind of converse about it. So there's that. But if we talk about, do fossil fuels contribute to global warming? People have opinions on that. I mean, people have come down one side or the other, and have they been conscientious? All right.
Lee, I'll ask you one quick question. We'll
Sure.
go on. But would you say you choose to believe that the Earth is spherical? I don't know that I could choose to believe that it's flat.
Which brings me to my next slide here.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll use that example as we go forward here. Okay. I choose to believe that it's round, by the way. And because being the engineer that I am, I rely on thinking scientifically. Thinking scientifically begins with wonder, curiosity, exploration, and discovery. It also begins from a skeptical stance, asking what evidence can I discover that disproves the dominant paradigm? Scientific thinking pertains to matters of fact, and I claim that thinking scientifically is the most reliable epistemology for falsifying factual claims. So since I'm a person who thinks scientifically, scientists tend to agree on this, since my daughter once flew an airplane basically around the world, since I can sit on the beach and see curved Earth, since I've seen photographs from space, I'm pretty much in there that it's there. And this is an idea of consilience again. Okay, all those examples I gave, and I once found 12 independent sources of evidence that all bear on the fact that the Earth is round. So yes, I choose to believe that the Earth is round. I'm fascinated by a documentary called Beyond the Curve, which is a documentary that follows the new flat Earth people. And it's just fascinating to try to understand what were they thinking and why are they doing this. But these
Yes,
are real
I would
people.
say, I guess I would just simply say that I couldn't choose to believe them. Like I don't have, that I'm so baked in.
Right.
Everything, my consilient worldview is that it's spherical.
Yeah.
And there's been no way, just like I can't really choose to axe murder my children, right? I can't really choose to do that because
Right.
of my constitution is so unbelievably organized in a particular
Right.
way. So anyway, we can.
Greg,
All
Greg, one quick thing. It may not be as hard to change that though, under new authority or proof, or, hey, wow, all of this has been fake and all of a sudden there's new information and we can switch to a new belief, you know, in interesting ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, it's something to come back to later, I think is like the motivations behind choices. So things like cognitive dissonance and talking about new information coming to light, cognitive dissonance, is that maybe something we could return to there.
Okay. So exploring worldviews, it's good to explore our worldviews and to challenge our deeply embedded assumptions, okay? Each of us holds basic assumptions about how the world works. These assumptions are formed early in our lives and influence how we interpret all that we experience.
Love this graph.
Yes, these worldviews represent a person's or a culture's answers to fundamental existential questions. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So worldviews create a positive feedback loop in our minds. Consider the developing mind of a young person eager to learn about the world. The youngster asks friends, parents, teachers, clergy, and other adults questions about how the world works, and they explore the world for themselves. Adults are likely to provide answers drawn from their own worldview, and the child begins to structure their knowledge into a similar worldview. This developing worldview establishes the Bayesian a prioris used to evaluate and interpret observations. Every person edits information based on their own confirmation bias, the human tendency to select, edit, and discount information in ways that confirm existing beliefs. As a result, beliefs are formed in ways that confirm and elaborate on existing worldviews. This process continues. As this process continues, beliefs strengthen the existing worldview and confirmation bias. Also, the confirmation bias strengthens the belief consistent with the existing worldview while discounting evidence that conflicts with that worldview. This forms a positive feedback loop. If the initial worldview is correct, if the initial worldview is incorrect, if it does not correspond to reality, then the person's belief will continue to drift away from reality. A child who is taught the great chain of being will look around and see kings, commoners, and slaves. Clerics will use their authority to describe divinity, good and evil. The selective evidence confirms the worldview. It's good to discover your own worldview and work to align it with reality. Intellectual honesty combines good faith, which is your best efforts to tell the truth, with a primary motivation towards seeking true beliefs. It's the second half that is maybe kind of novel in this definition. But I list here some of the tools or exercises or activities that an intellectually honest person will be really needs to go through. And I assert that we have a moral duty to be intellectually honest. Knowing how you know, how do you decide what to believe? Fake news bombards us in many different forms from many different directions. We see many forces of information here labeled as raw stimuli. But somehow, from this steady stream of incoherent information, at the end of the day, we manage to decide what we believe is true, what we are unsure of, and what we regard as false. To do this, each of us uses some theory of knowledge to assess the cacophony of raw stimulus that we're constantly exposed to and to decide what it is we believe. I need to point out, of course, for this audience that I use the phrase theory of knowledge differently than Gregg does, but allow me this. It's basically how you decide to choose from the raw stimuli what you're going to put into your buckets of true, unsure, or false. So your theory of knowledge is the set of rules you follow to decide what to believe. Since you have chosen your beliefs, you must have some theory of knowledge in some form. However, it's unlikely you've given it much thought, written it down, tested it, refined it, or applied it conscientiously to evaluating your own beliefs. We have the opportunity, and indeed the moral obligation, to create a reliable theory of knowledge that helps us know how we know. It's good to know how you know. So I encourage you to choose your beliefs, and I believe we have a moral duty to choose our beliefs carefully, choose them consistently, to know how we know, and describe how we choose our beliefs, to choose true beliefs, and improve our process for choosing true beliefs. Now, recently I wrote an essay called Choosing My Beliefs, and this is kind of the criteria that I use. It's out there in the link. And I'll be refining it as I learn more. So it seems peculiar to me that people vigorously defend beliefs that they hold, yet they seem baffled to explain how they choose their beliefs. Furthermore, I contend that basic differences in personal epistemologies are at the root of the many ideological divides we face. I contend we are in a world divided by two epistemologies. One is reality-based, which is what I have here, and others are more story-based or lore-based. I challenge you to write down how you choose your beliefs before strenuously arguing to defend those beliefs. And I have in parentheses here, and before voting based on those beliefs. Any questions on this? All right. So here's just some matters of fact. The Eiffel Tower is 300 meters tall. The Earth is nearly spherical. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Barack Obama was born in Hawaii. Vaccines do not cause autism. Contraception does prevent abortion. Trump did not have the largest inauguration crowd. Biological evolution is the origins of biodiversity. Reality does exist. Reality supersedes conjecture. Denial and delusion are the words we use to describe insistence that something is not true despite overwhelming evidence. And reality is our common ground. We all live in the same planet, in the same universe. Reliable methods for examining reality converge toward the same result. These are matters of fact. We can proceed confidently on the basis of these facts. These facts are not within the scope of political correctness nor cultural relativism. If political and religious leaders would simply stand up and present this slide with conviction, the world would be a better place. Together, we could all move toward real good.
Hi, Lee, this is Anthony, Paulina's husband.
Sure.
Long time listener, first time caller.
Good.
But I wanted to kind of ask for if you could kind of clarify something, because for me, all this makes a ton of sense, really interesting. One of the areas I find problematic is that a lot of facts, I would say, it's, you know, the old saying is, you know, history is written by the victors, and whoever kind of, you know, how do I say this? Like, I find one example is, you know, we go to school and kind of the universal idea, like Christopher Columbus is kind of universally hated. People hate, you know, I don't think that's, you know, crazy to say that. But if you kind of look at a lot of the facts behind him, there's a lot of like, I don't want to say lies that kind of became facts. And like one of the things where he said, oh, they quote him wanting to enslave the native Taino. That was a mistranslation of the Spanish. And so one of his predecessors said a lot of bad stuff about him that became fact. And now we have teachers teaching kids, you know, not that he's this perfect guy. I'm just saying that it's interesting to me is that, and even Adam Ruins Everything, pretty popular show, pretty much got most of the facts wrong, but that becomes the fact in a millennial mind, or, you know, these new minds. How do you, I guess my thing is, because we talk about facts, even on this slide here, we're talking about facts, and obviously these are, you know, pretty clear. How do you reason with that a lot of this, there are some facts that people assume it's just, I guess it's controversial, but people kind of just assume things are facts.
Yeah, so a couple things here. There's a quote often attributed to Mark Twain: "A lie gets halfway around the world before you can get your boots on." Okay, so that's definitely true. The phrase, "Where was Barack Obama born?" Something that's just absolutely astounding to me is that something like a third of voters or a third of Republicans or something like that think that he was born not in this country. The fact that the birther thing could get the traction that it does, the fact that there actually are people who will argue with almost anything that I have up here is true. I have an essay, you'll see it on the list there, called Resolving a Fundamental Paradox, I think it's called. And basically what is true is that people, well, let me use the example of the birther. You can demonstrate your allegiance to Trump by asserting something that is objectively false, but that he says is true. So you're choosing Trump over truth, and that is a sense of loyalty. You're basically signaling the extent of your loyalty to Team Trump when you do that. So that's a part of it, signaling team allegiance. The other thing is, people do not have, I'm the only person I know who wrote an essay called Choosing My Beliefs. They do not know how they've come to these beliefs. Basically, the story I tell, going back 5,000 years, if you wanted to know something, you couldn't look it up. I mean, you had to ask your parents or your friends or your clergy or the chief or something like that, and that's how you learned things. Today, if someone you like tells you something, you will believe it unless you have a rigorous epistemology. With respect to the Christopher Columbus example, I assert that there is exactly one history. There's exactly one history, but there's any number of partial, incomplete, and often incorrect retellings of history. So basically, when you're reading any history book, you have to go back to my diagram where reality is vast and we're only seeing a curated small sample of that. And you need to understand how this book I read fits in with all the others. So I don't know if I addressed what you're asked or not.
No, that's perfect. It's just for me, it's interesting because, like you said, you addressed it. It's just interesting to me because, you know, I guess what is a fact? Like, some of these are very obvious. I think some facts get a little convoluted at times or can be controversial.
Lee, can I add something?
Sure.
One of the things that I think is useful is to think of like useful truths, right? Because we could get caught up with, you know, objective reality and knowing objective reality. We can also get lost in like the details of that or the finite. So is the Eiffel Tower exactly 300 meters tall, or is it, you know, 0.0 whatever? We get to the atomic level, it gets very subtle and
right.
difficult. You know, you're talking about what your friend tells you and believing that to be true. I'm going to guess that you weren't in Hawaii when Barack was born
I was not there.
to know that, but yet you're sure it's true, right? So when we're making meaning, there's a certain usefulness of either trusting evidence or trusting authority because of the complexity of what we're dealing with, right? So just saying like blanket statements like this is true, this is true, this is true, is a little bit of a broad brush in my estimation, whereas some things are very knowable depending on linguistics and what we actually mean by it, and some, is the cat on the mat. We're all going to agree on what that means. We can see it, agree. But a crazy person could still be there and disagree with that, and that has to be dealt with in some way. So there's the perception and all the things that are happening internally. So even your description of reality and sort of like knowing how to pick your beliefs, I think there's an internal whole side to this, like the subjective reality of what's true about me that you'll never know because it's internal to me, like what my left foot feels like or what my sense of anxiety is, right? So it's just a very textured, almost broader conversation than just, it's incredibly useful to tend toward real beliefs, of course, like that would be very helpful in our world and in our meaning making, but I just wanted to call out that it seems a little more subtle maybe than some of them.
Good. A couple of things. First off, the first of the intellectual virtues is a love of knowledge. And part of that is spending more time on the important things than the unimportant things, okay? So that's one of the ideas there.
Sure.
The other thing about, and I always like the example of the height of the Eiffel Tower. If people disagree on that, they might have different definitions. The height to the observation deck or the top, height from where. We know that it's temperature variable. It's going to be taller and shorter depending on temperature. If it's off by a millimeter, we're learning about the accuracy of our measurement techniques, and we're converging towards reality and so on. So what I've been trying to do, I came up with the Eiffel Tower thing about 3 or 4 years ago. When I'm unsure about where reality is, I try to understand how that might be analogous to the Eiffel Tower thing. Is it a definitional issue? Is it a partial measurement? Is it a measurement accuracy, and so on? And go.
But a part of wisdom is maybe understanding what's a useful amount of truth to be able to move forward and make.
Correct. And then the last of the intellectual virtues was practical wisdom, which is exactly.
So, but I really love that idea of useful truth instead of claiming absolute truth, because that opens us up to perspective differences, and is it true from where you're looking and I'm looking, and bringing subject object into it.
There's a saying: seek out truth and avoid anyone who claims to know it. I think is the
that's good. All right,
go. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what is easy. Okay. Now let's go on to what ought to be. Okay. So what is good?
That was the easy part.
So we've looked at what's real, and now we can look at what's good. These images are adapted from the Sam Harris talk, Science Can Answer Moral Questions. And does anyone have any difficulty deciding which image shows the preferred conditions? Would anyone volunteer to trade places with the man in the world view? So we can identify at least 6 criteria for deciding what is good based on the goal of increasing well-being. These 6 criteria are flourishing, which I call focusing on what matters, living the golden rule, human dignity, human rights worldwide, facing the grand challenges, and moral reasoning. So let's look at these in a little more depth. We flourish when we focus on what matters. What matters is human experience. What matters is well-being. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Spend your time on what matters most, okay? So I have a Wikiversity course called What Matters. It lists 40 topics here. I won't go through them, but the topics listed here do matter. They're inspired by the work of Abraham Maslow, Martin Seligman, and his positive psychology work and research on well-being and others. Use these to organize your life and set your priorities. Spend more time on what matters and less time on distractions, destructions, and trivialities. I won't go through these. If anyone has a question on any one of them, we can talk about that. Okay. It's good to live the golden rule. The golden rule is embraced by at least 13 of the world's religions indicated here in this poster. Because these various statements of the golden rule concept emerged independently it's likely that the Golden Rule expresses a fundamental truth about living as humans. On April 1st, 1961, the cover of the Saturday Evening Post featured an original painting by Norman Rockwell honoring the Golden Rule, traditionally stated as "do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Professor Harry Gensler has dedicated much of his life and career to studying the Golden Rule. In his book, Ethics and the Golden Rule, published in 2013, he examines the Golden Rule in depth. He rephrases the Golden Rule as we see here to clarify common misunderstandings, and he addresses simplistic misunderstandings and many more fallacies. With this understanding, he asks us to treat others only as you consent to being treated in the same situation. He goes on to say that the Golden Rule, with roots in a wide range of world cultures, is well suited to be a standard that different cultures can apply to in resolving conflicts. As the world becomes more interconnected and evolves towards a single interacting global community, the need for such a common standard is becoming more urgent. It is good to treat others only as you consent to being treated in the same situation. Living the Golden Rule is an essential step in our journey towards seeking real good and attaining a global perspective. Dignity, I think you guys are probably well up on the concept of dignity. We can improve our world by learning to preserve dignity for all people. It's good to respect and preserve dignity in yourselves and others worldwide. I recently read a book called Justice for Hedgehogs, which basically says if you understand dignity, you can use that as the basis for an entire moral code. So that's a good thing. On December 10th, 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. Eleanor Roosevelt led the effort to establish that declaration. It's good to read the text and understand the declaration. The declaration consists of 30 articles which have been elaborated in subsequent international treaties, regional human rights instruments, national constitutions, and other laws. It's good to preserve and protect human rights worldwide. The preamble says, whereas the recognition of the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement. It's good to preserve and protect human rights worldwide. I have a proposal which has gone nowhere, but I still think it's a great idea, to hold an Olympics where instead of judging long jump, you judge nations based on their achievements with respect to the 30 declarations of the of human rights. I've met with some professors and so on, and they shake their head yes, and then nothing happens. And I can point you to that.
Well, if you're talking to professors, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, yeah, I even was recommended one, but I've described it as the best idea I ever had, but it goes nowhere. So that's that. All right. The world faces many grand challenges. These grand challenges represent the greatest obstacles to attaining universal well-being. So let's wait a few seconds to let the slide complete. Use these grand challenges to establish priorities. It's good to adopt a global perspective and look beyond a tribal's perspective. It's good to address the grand challenges. I've said it somewhat more starkly, is if the work you're doing is not going to move the needle on one of these things, do something else. That causes me great worry from time to time. But that's I think how this list can be useful. So moral reasoning are the considerations we use to determine what we ought to do. I don't think there's any short statement or shortcut to moral reasoning. So I provide here a moral reasoning toolkit, which you can see listed here. In general, what I'll call first order moral issues you'll see most of these tests or criteria or methods converge towards the answer, which is a good thing. But again, there's no unified theory of moral reasoning. Okay. Now we can begin to combine what is real with what is good. Narrow definitions of traditional disciplines often lead us to perceive a false dichotomy, encouraging us to choose between science and religion, or to see science and religion somehow opposed to each other. This dichotomy can be easily resolved if we independently consider how each activity represents good and corresponds with reality. Consider the area plotted here where correspondence with reality is represented on the horizontal axis, and worth, goodness, or well-being is represented on the vertical axis. Genocide and other grand challenges are real, but not good. Utopia describes good, but is not real. It's fun and instructive to place items on this plot. We must recognize that neither complete correspondence with reality nor absolute good can be achieved. It's best to consider pursuit of these elusive goals as an ongoing quest. The blue arrow indicates the direction of that quest, but not its end. Examining evidence, critical inquiry, and scientific investigations assess correspondence with reality. Flourishing, the golden rule, dignity, and human rights improve well-being and represent the good. And of course, the people in this forum are real good. Wise people use these real good coordinate system to understand where their work is heading. We're familiar with the familiar imperative to do no harm. Do no harm. An important parallel imperative is to advance no falsehoods. Together, these create 4 quadrants. The investigator seeks out what is real, perhaps without regard to what is good. The dreamer seeks out what is good, perhaps without regard to what is real. Evil spirits are not real and not good. Only the sage seeks out what is both real and good. Use these quadrants to evaluate what is both real and good. As you listen to clergy, politicians, salespeople, and charlatans, evaluate what they are saying on the basis of advance no falsehoods. It can open your eyes to the work we need to do before we are all seeking real good.
This is phenomenal, Lee. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Oh, never mind.
Will we always be hampered by the schism separating what is good from what is real? Must there be 2 distinct directions of inquiry? Is there no end to fussing with distinctions between the good and the real? In our traditional way of thinking, we consider the work of scientists and other investigators who are searching for what is real to be heading in a very different direction from the mystics and clerics who are searching for what is good. But perhaps this is an illusion. Perhaps this is the result of our occluded view of how the world is based on the limitations of our current understanding. Perhaps eventually we can lift the veil and see beyond this illusion and recognize that when we fully understand what is real, when we have removed all veils and errors, it can only be good. As we persevere in searching for what is good, it can only be useful if it is real. Our search for the good will have to become real because we will have outgrown our fascination with unreal fantasies. Also, in searching for what is real, it is only useful if it is good. As a result, as our understanding increases, both paths converge on an ultimate wisdom. Without a doubt, this is a place of great beauty. Okay, 2 different directions converge there. Enjoy seeking real good throughout your life. Progress through these stages of growth towards living wisely. Embrace reality. Know what is real. Face facts and seek true beliefs. Know what is true and why it's true. Advance no falsehoods. Dispel fallacies and dismiss nonsense. Pursue well-being. Know what is good and why it's good. Flourish and prevent misery. Live the golden rule. Respect dignity and preserve human rights worldwide. Enjoy seeking real good throughout your life and choose to live wisely. Real good people of the world unite. We have nothing to lose but nonsense, mischief, misery, and cruelty. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Lee.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation, by the way.
You're welcome.
I'd like to go back to that slide you showed where there was a cacophony of things which we could sense. A big sphere full of...
This one, there you go.
That one right there, exactly.
Okay.
And then there's the theory of knowledge and
Right.
what it leads to. What I'm curious about, my training and my interests are in mechanisms.
Okay.
This theory of knowledge filter, if you will, that you're describing, how might we understand the different ways in which such a filter is created by people? Because we're all getting the same cacophony, but we are coming to different conclusions. And I wonder if maybe it isn't because we are utilizing variations of that theory of knowledge, my theory of knowledge.
So do you see my slide, one world divided by two epistemologies?
Yes.
So I just put this together recently, but my epistemology, and I wrote it down, and it's in the link you sent you, is reality-based. I think others are what I call lore-based, story-based, which might be based on an affiliation and authority. Okay, the boss told me this is so, loyalty, I'm on team so-and-so, so whatever they do, I do, or friends told me this. Or there are ideological things, conservative dogma, theological dogma, and so on, where basically the ideology comes first. And those people who have that don't recognize that the map is not the territory. And then a lot of people are what I'll generously call convenient. They just believe whatever they want to believe, whatever convenient, whatever they heard last, or so on. What I'm claiming here, and I think this is an important leverage point, is that if people would take the time to write down, if they would write down this.
You have the right slide up.
Mike, I switched slides, but I went from this slide, which is one world divided by two epistemologies. Do you see that?
We see the knowing how you know right now, which is what you were pointing at before, but it's not, doesn't seem to be switching to the other slide.
Oh, okay. I think it has to do with the way you share slides. Just a minute. I'm screen sharing.
You may have only shared the application. And
Yeah, I shared the application, I think. Let me just try something here. Okay. So I was speaking to this slide, okay? One world divided by two epistemologies. And I wrote mine, and it's reality-based, and here I am, and I'm a smug guy. The question was, how do other people do it? And I don't know. I'm not other people. I've been asking people for a few years, how do you know it's true? How do you choose your beliefs, and not getting anywhere? But I think that it's what I said, lore-based, story-based, or affiliation-based, or ideological-based, or some kind of convenience. So I think that's what goes on. Let me get back to here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. However, my impression is that people in general, speak about them in general,
Okay.
people in general do both. They have a theory of knowledge system which they apply based upon their perception of reality and the myth and the lores and the stories and all that go on together. I don't see it, in practice, I don't see it as an either or choice. The world we must deal with, of people, we must recognize, I believe, that people are using both.
I think that that is true. And if you read my essay on how I choose my beliefs, I might allow for that. But I think what happens is that if you don't write it down, what happens is you decide what you would like to believe based on it feeling comfortable, and then you come up with the justification post hoc. What I'm suggesting is, as a challenge, is to write down your method, always use the same one, keep it with you, and see how it holds up. And I think that if you want to write down, I go with science on these and stories on those, go right ahead. But I think the only way you can avoid a post hoc justification of a belief that you come to is to write down how you come to them.
These are, I believe what we're talking about are justification systems. And I'm not sure, and maybe this is a reflection of my own ignorance, I'm not sure that the professors, the learned sages, have written down what they perceive to be the collection of theories of knowledge that people utilize. And I, from what you're saying, it looks like that it would be important to do that.
Mm-hmm. It baffles me that people will go in, shout at each other, pound the table, shoot at each other based on beliefs that they hold. And you ask them, how did you come to that belief? And it's like, I just believe it. I don't know what they say. They say something that's just as nonsensical to me.
Right. So you agree that many, many beliefs are formed without choice at all.
Correct.
Okay.
Without conscious choice.
Right. So it is, what you're proposing is that we should reflect on our beliefs with some deliberative process and be systematized in the way in which we choose to invest and support them or not.
Correct. And you prioritize those based on some idea of importance, okay? Mm-hmm. And if you're going to go into the voting booth based on some set of beliefs, you owe it to your fellow citizens for them to be accurate.
Right. So then, yeah, Rob, you going to say something? We can.
Yeah, I think the beliefs are a little more subtle than that in almost all cases. If it is actually up for debate in our own consciousness, we probably hold it more as what I would call an opinion. Beliefs are, in the way I usually use that word and talk about it, we're meaning-making machines. We're dealing with the complexity of this. We're not taking in all of it. We're shutting down certain things with our attentional focus, and we're trying to make meaning. And then we move forward, and we have a lot of evolutionary stuff that helps us kind of sometimes make the wrong decision, but maybe it's for safety purposes, or right. So self-delusion is maybe even an evolutionary advantage in some cases, right? And maybe in today's world it starts to hold us back. It's way more subtle than that. And most of us are not arguing for a belief in the moment. We're arguing for what we think is a truth. And so to me,
and a position.
And a position, right? Yeah, so a certain position at reality. And one of the biggest mistakes is when I'm slamming the table saying, I know truth, I know all truth. Instead of what's a much more mature view is really the wisdom of understanding that all views are partial. I have some partial truth. Hopefully it's a useful meaning making, and we can tend toward having a conversation from other perspectives but that sort of like the amount of beliefs that are conscious enough, like even to write down, I would say is a very small list as compared to all of the meaning making that we're doing and just taking as fact kind of unconsciously, right? That I long ago said that beliefs are almost like an error of treating an opinion as a fact, right? So the belief is I really believe it to be true, so I personally think of it as truth. But, it's later I might learn, oh, that was a belief, that's inaccurate, I wasn't right. And that's sort of the error of being human. And that's where the wisdom line, you get better and better and better at that as you become more wise.
Yeah, that's good. Part of the problem is I don't know a better English language word than belief. What I mean by belief is a statement that I hold to be true, okay? A statement that I hold to be true. Now, as you're pointing out,
you might try out justification.
Yeah, well, right. And so, but if I hold it to be true, like I'm not considering it as a belief in that moment. My subjective experience is true, right? I've already been fooled, maybe if I'm wrong, but I'm holding it as true.
Right.
Subjectively, right? Okay.
the question of justification, I mentioned justified true belief as a definition of knowledge, and philosophers have argued over what the word justification means and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit tricky. I do want to point out, though, that that my use of the word belief is probably more narrow than yours is, especially those of you who do counseling and so on, who get the full subconscious and what I haven't considered and what I've always had around and so on and so forth. I put the slide up just for the humility, readiness to learn new things. That's an important part here.
So, Lee, would it be fair to say then that you're a scientific realist? I mean, this seems to be basically a scientific realist articulation.
Correct, but I hope the next word out of your mouth is not science. What's the word?
Scientistic.
Scientistic, yes.
Yeah.
So I have a cute phrase borrowed from Lucy from Peanuts, which is that true beliefs may not be everything, but false beliefs aren't anything. So when it comes to matters of fact, I think the scientific method, and by the way, I call it thinking scientifically rather than the scientific method. And of course, this applies to history. We heard the history example from our guest here and so on.
So one other comment, and then I'll see if others. So the constructionist view emerges in the 20th century in particular. And then particularly the sociological constructionist view and the philosophical continentalist view. I'm not sure exactly, but there was the emergence of many arguments, okay, that you can't escape the socio-historical context of the beliefs that you're immersed in, okay? Meaning that people will sit around and experience Trump a fundamentally different way than other people experience him, okay? As a wide variety of different, and to sort it out in terms of Trump is good, Trump is bad, or factual statements that claim states of affairs are really very different than the gestalt, contextualized, meaning-making, I like this guy, I don't like this guy, he aligns with what my interests. And so the argument is to try to decipher scientific realism where you're trying to correspond a decipherable claim about factual states of affairs is not the way people, determine what is true in a pragmatic sense, nor does it give rise to how we would actually differentiate whether or not Trump is good or Black Lives Matter is good, or put it in I deal with this all the time in terms of many people will come to me as, say, in a client, say, as couples, and her narrative is he's annoying, he's absorbed in his thing, and he's not sensitive and thoughtful. And his narrative is, well, she's nagging me and she's constantly asking for my attention in a particular way, and she's being hypersensitive. And they have their narratives, right?
And I'm guessing what you do is ask for examples. Tell me what happened. So I think
one of the things I actually do is I help people realize that naive realism, okay, just I see the world as it is because that's how I experience it, is not ideal. And I'm not claiming you advocate for naive realism, but a lot of philosophical people will critique scientific realism as a sophisticated, but ultimately grounded in a kind of naive realism that gets challenged. Now people debate that. This is a refined debate position.
But let's take something simple, which is, where was Barack Obama born? Okay, that is a matter of fact that can be determined convincingly, and a third of the electorate just decided no, they're not going to go there. Okay, and we can argue whether the birth of lie came first, or liking Trump came first, or loyalty, or whatever. But it's unfortunate that millions of people went into the voting booth and pulled the lever because they believed Barack Obama was not born in this country. That's a fairly simple matter of fact. There's nothing subjective about that. They got it wrong, and here we are. Mike.
Leland,
Yes.
I like your style. You're bold. I like you. I liked your talk.
Thank you.
I agreed with virtually nothing.
Oh, right. And I told you to stop me.
I couldn't.
Yeah, Mike is not. We're gonna. Mike's a little on different.
There's two things that you said that I thought were just remarkably wonderful. What did you say? You could choose Trump or choose the truth. I thought that was brilliant. And you put all those things on there. You said, if you're not working towards some of these things, reconsider what you're doing.
Right.
I thought that was wonderful. There's so many questions that I could ask you, especially since you've kind of, enticed us to. But I'll stick to one.
Okay.
How, on the one hand, you're saying that it is possible for us to have true knowledge, correspondence to the world, correspondence to reality. On the other hand, you quote Nin, who says, we do not see the world as it is, we see it as we are. How is that not a contradiction?
What I argue is that we are responsible for the worldview that we hold. And as you pointed out, my worldview is one of, that I begin with the idea of a single unified reality that can be understood, at least to the limits of our instruments. And that is my worldview. I argue somewhat parochially that if you hold a different worldview, you get what you deserve. That's too provocative? But
let's take you put. I'm sorry to jump in here, but
Yeah,
I
right.
can't help it. Okay, so I often will say, well, what is a piece of shit? Okay,
Right.
and to me, it's sort of like, well, I don't want it. I want to flush it down the toilet, but to a
Right.
dung beetle, it's a meal.
That's correct.
Okay, so obviously a piece of shit is not either good or bad.
Correct.
A piece of shit depends on one's perspective on the world.
Correct.
Right. And the same way that if I'm an alcoholic, a part of me wants that drink and it's good for me right now.
Right.
And the other part of me says, oh my God, no, that leads me to a problematic, because there's another future self that doesn't like this. So what you're going to have is an explosion of perspectival goodness, a perspectival emphases, and even inside of people, yet alone across people, yet alone across species. So the idea that you can utilize scientific realism to decide what is real and then anchor yourself from that and then say, well, but actually what we see and what we experience is a function of our constituted, constructed worldview. I mean, to me, that basically is the head-on philosophical, clash between the more subjective, intersubjective constructivists and the more sort of objectively oriented realists, which remains one of the thorniest issues in philosophy. And I guess what I'm saying is, it feels like, I guess it still remains that way, even though I think it's super crucial to have a really nice anchor in a particular way of going, if that makes sense.
A couple things. First off, I do not claim to be able to bridge the gap from is to ought. Okay. Even though I read John Searle's 1964 paper about if you make a promise, you ought to keep it and everything else. So I'm not making that claim. I'm also allowing for subjective evaluations. I'll change the topic to ice cream rather than your example, where I used the example of ice cream. I said it's very good, and you said not if you're lactose intolerant. Okay, but I'm really trying to solve a problem that I think is very solvable, yet persists in the world, and that is to at least agree on matters of fact, like I'm showing here. Okay, and the unfortunate thing is, I think that even somebody who's not as nerdy as me will come to the conclusions that I've drawn here, yet many people don't do that.
Can I be one of them?
Yes. You already are.
Two things. You had Well, maybe I'll talk about, I want to say two things, but we'll stick with this slide. I want you to go to another slide instead, but we'll stick with this one. Scientifically speaking, none of these are facts, okay? Scientifically speaking, with the possible exception of the first one, okay? What shape is the Earth? Nearly spherical. Well, that's kind of not a very clear statement as
right. But there is the 1980.
Hold on. I get you. Sorry. What are the origins of biodiversity? Biological evolution. Biological evolution is a theory. It's not a fact. A fact is, here's this fossil. Here's this fossil. Here, a fact is, you know, we did this experiment and this particular thing came out. Biological evolution is a theory that is a set of hypothetical constructs that is supported by a body of facts. So scientifically speaking, you're using the word fact wrong and using it in a common sense term that I would say truth with a small t. I'll buy each one of those as a truth with a small t. But philosophically and scientifically, none of them are facts except for the first one, I want to say. Here's what I want to suggest to you as I want to make the following hopefully constructive suggestion. You had that slide where you were all the way on you were the realist, or what was it, the realist guy, and then you had all the ones who had the faulty epistemologies.
The two epistemologies.
Yeah, the two epistemologies.
Yeah, one was reality-based and the other was
one was reality-based, right. And the other one was all the rest of them. I want to suggest that there's a third. Okay. And the third is phenomenology. Okay. If you look at Husserl, if you look at Heidegger, if you look at Husserl, he says very clearly that we tend to think of ourselves as in the natural world first. We experience the world as a world of objects and a world of things. But then he goes on to say, well, that can't be the case. That what we are living in, because we can never step outside of our experience. We have our experience of the world. You need dashes. Experience of the world. It's all one thing. So that our experience, we don't live, I would argue, in the real world, as you suggested. We live in the intersubjective world. You need to have an intersubjective shared frame of reference before you can experience the world as natural. So what I want to suggest to you, and it's not on your list, that's why I'm hoping it's a constructive thing, that the idea that here's a reality, here's a mind, that's gotten us into trouble for 1,000 years or 2,000 years. Rather, the mind in the world, the person in the world, we are inextricable. And that an epistemology that comes out of that may be something that can bridge what you're talking about, the mind, we see the world as we are, we see the world as it is. That can bridge the two, is my hope. And I offer that to you as a possible way to...
That links to Andre Marquis' talk on the quadrants. So.
That was great, by the way. Can I add a little something that many of you might already know or whatever? And Lee, I just think I've had a sense from almost the beginning of this sort of how that objective reality knowing it reminds me of two parts of Ken Wilber's, equal model, right? You have this sort of interior and exterior. And I'm sure I read in one of his books, I've used it as his example forever, the different kinds of like what happiness may be, right? You could imagine a neuroscientist can objectify the neurons that really lead to happiness or whatever. And he could say, I know what happiness is. Here it is. It's out here, right? And yet the meditator who's having a subjective experience of happiness is going, that's not happiness at all. That there's two very different ways to look at happiness, right? One is objectified and one is experienced. And so this kind of default to realism, even if it were accurate, which I really like what Michael just said about thinking about that differently, but like, let's say it's fully accurate in that objectified world, it's still partial, right? It's still only that I'm trying to find real out here. And especially once we start talking about beliefs and all these things, we might say there's one external reality that we're all relating to. I would maybe say that's true, right? I could be talked out of that should science find new things out about the world. But let's just assume it sure feels like there's one reality out there. But there's also 7.5 billion internal realities relating to that with very different perspectives, very different true experiences that are internal and inaccessible to others. And that's where a lot of this confusion comes from. So I'm also a huge fan of Sam Harris. I watch a lot of his stuff. I don't know how deep into Ken Wilber's work you've been, but some of his, just quickly looking at the AQUAL model, gives us like a different perspectiving tool that's super useful, I think.
Yeah, so we just had a presentation on that.
Yeah.
You did? Okay, awesome. Yeah, yeah.
So I have an essay for that. It's called Perceptions Are Personal. And it's kind of inspired by the parable of the six blind men and the elephant that we talked about 1 or 2 times ago. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's, you know, people will tell you perception is reality. I hear that very often, and I pondered that for some time. And perceptions are personal. What you perceive is what's in your head, the way you think about the world. But it's an error to overgeneralize that to that's the way the world is. If you think of the 6 blind men and the elephants, they make 2 errors. One is by saying, the guy who had the tail, by saying an elephant is tail-like, and the tusk guy by saying an elephant is tusk-like. That's an overgeneralization. That's just simply a logic error. And the other error they made was failing to integrate their findings, okay? They argued with the other guy rather than saying, hey, your viewpoint is valid.
So yeah, so I mean, I literally just took the external world, and I'm not even sure I can say that there's one thing out there. That's how unsure I am about reality, and how gently I want to do that. And yet, you know, that Barack Obama was born in Hawaii. And I just want to say, like, personal knowing, it's maybe a useful truth to agree in that and have that be what we all decide to do voting on, et cetera. But it's entirely possible that a month from now, there could be some new shocking evidence that comes out that makes that completely wrong. So, you know, any amount of time abstracts our access to truth, right? So there's isness to truth in this moment subjectively, and then how we're modeling the world. And yeah, so.
So our evolving understanding, I guess, is the way I deal with that. Yeah. So a couple things, I may have lost them here.
I think my point, I'm sorry that I knocked you off your point. I didn't mean to do that. But I think what I was trying to make is that exactly what you were saying about that kind of, let's say, calling the elephant's tail true, feels a little bit in this presentation like what you were doing. And so it's like, let's be careful with saying that the tail is reality, right? Instead of the entire elephant. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So you do open the door before walking through, though, right?
It's a useful truth to do that, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not postmodern, and it's all in here either. Right?
Okay.
That's what wisdom is sort of us all getting better at navigating that.
So, so I have an example. A poem is ink on a paper. True statement or false?
False.
I mean, it could be digital. It could. There's a lot of other things it could be. Right. It could be, you know, pencil, right? Or it could be the art of it.
So, you know, this one is ink on a paper. It's not only ink on a paper. It's letters on a paper. It's words on a paper. It's stanzas on a paper. It's ideas being conveyed. It's metaphors being examined, and so on. So I think it is, I mean, yeah, they can be in different media, but at least if the poem is written on a paper, I can say the poem is ink on a paper, but there are many levels of abstraction at which it can be
partial
considered.
Truth. Yeah, so so there's like I think it's Keegan who talks about sort of the socialized mind, and then the next level of evolution is a real sense of being able to kind of have your own opinion and really do it, but that an even more evolved mind is one that knows that even your own lenses are ones that need to be investigated. So
let me see if there's some other, there may be a few other questions here as we
for sure.
round up.
For sure.
So
I want to say, if I can, that the poem is in no way, shape, manner, or form ink on a paper. It is not. I think the poem is lyrical language. I don't know the definition. The lyrical language designed to evoke poetry. It's got nothing to do with the pixels on the screen. It's got nothing to do with the ink.
Corinne, did you have a question?
Just on that, I just want to go to Gregg's periodic chart.
To shut us up.
No, Gregg's periodic chart, and I don't have it memorized, but calling a poem ink on a paper is the leftmost column. And then as the various abstractions, you're moving to the right on that.
Well, What a poem is it? That's a good question. But let me make sure some people have some opportunity. I haven't had a chance. Corinne, did you have a question, Corinne? Did I see you? Okay. Ria, did you? Zach? Okay, Zach.
Yes. So, yeah, I'm really struggling with this true beliefs idea. So, you know, when you observe, like let's say languages, could we go to slide number 15, please? I like that slide. Yeah. So if we could just, for the moment, compare languages that over time, historically, emerged over time, independently in different regions, right? Different languages. So if we take that and then say, okay, did the truths also kind of emerge differently in different cultures and different languages? And in each one of these, for example, when you say folklore, so a particular tribe in a particular geographical region has a theory of knowledge. And that theory of knowledge tells them what is true, what is, you know, false, you know, all that thing. So it seems to me that like what Sam Harris is hung up on, and maybe this point of view that's hung up on, is the truth itself. Like, you know, to me, it's pretty subjective. You know, the truth, again, the way it looks to me from a particular point of view, it's pretty subjective. And what's wrong with, let's say, a country like the US, for example, where you have people who, you know, are in the birther movement, let's say, people who, there are all kinds of little circles of truth that people believe in. So how do you, if there's somebody, let's say if there was some Olympics, who is going to judge, you know, who wins this Olympics? Like, you know, who picks the judge and how do they evaluate? So the point is, it's all subjective stuff. And maybe the way to look at it is from the other side, the flourishing side. So if, let's say that the universal truths in the world and all the cultural traditions were meant to tell us or teach us something about how to live a happy life as an individual, as a family, as a tribe, you know, as a country. And when you look at it from that lens, well, there are perfectly many religions and many cults that people are able to take a small amount of truth and live very happy lives. And so I'm just wondering if these buckets that we're making of true beliefs and some things being facts and not, if depending on, you know, what the objective is, that we're just like creating another circle where we're arguing about stuff that doesn't really help you flourish as an individual, as a family, or, you know, as a community. I don't know if it made any sense, but it just my general comments.
Couple things. Folklore. You know, you mentioned folklore and myths and so on, and I think it's Jonathan Haidt who kind of suggests it this way. He argues that in a tribal society, folklore, myths, religions, loyalty, obedience, and so on are essential skills within a tribal society. It makes it cohesive. You can tell the in-group from the out-group, which is essential for survival in a tribal slide, in a tribal culture, and so on. What I argue is that one of the big struggles today is that we're evolving from a historically or traditionally tribal society, small groups or bands of people, to what's now a global thing. And you can easily find a list of about 200 origin stories, okay? And each of these is somebody's folklore, something that was believed, something was the best efforts, and so on. What's happening today in the religious community is that there is disagreement among which of those origin stories is true. And and people fight over that kind of a thing, okay? So whereas it was very helpful 5,000 or 10,000 years ago in a tribal society to have the Middle East killing each other because one thinks this and one thinks that because of their origin story or so on and so forth, is not helpful. And I argue that reality, and we can learn a lot about reality using the investigation techniques. Reality is the final arbiter of these kinds of disputes. And if you don't have that final arbiter, it's just arbitrary. So I believe that folklore has outlived its usefulness.
Nick has a question.
I just want to say one thing, and I'm going to sound like a brat for saying it, but
So
it's purely just this whole search for what is truth, what is reality, is what creates the problem of trying to answer it. Because, well, like the way Terence McKenna would say it is reality is real. We don't. It's not us who creates it. It's there. So we can call it whatever we want. We can try to, go through all these advanced methods, and it's terribly interesting to do so, which is why it's a valid pursuit. But ultimately, and I'm a big phenomenologist, so I think everything is ultimately subjective, or subjectively absolute, or relatively absolute. But it's kind of a moot point, or a useless question to ask. What is real?
well, let me just test that.
Okay.
Let's go back to the year 1632. And the question is, does the earth go around the sun, or does the sun go around the earth? I believe that question is a matter of fact. I believe that question has to do with correspondence to the way the universe is and the way the universe has been for 1 billion years before even man observed. And if you think that didn't matter, you have to answer why the Pope put Galileo under house arrest even after he recanted, okay? It is a matter of consequence. It is a matter that people argue over. I believe there is a fact of that matter, and that by investigating the real world using conscientious techniques, there's a way to adjudicate or arbitrate or decide that question.
To your point, I'll clarify my initial comment, and it does matter in the relative world, and from my more spiritual ontology, it doesn't matter in an absolute sense. In the non-dual sense, it doesn't matter at all. But in the relative sense, in the sense of reality as experienced by people and our evolution and social issues and all of that, absolutely it matters.
Does wearing a mask slow the spread of COVID-19?
Yeah.
Is that consequential?
Sure.
That's an example of a matter of fact that I believe can be determined through careful investigation and is consequential today, and is being.
But that's a pragmatic. We're claiming it. Is it a matter of fact if I wear a mask the next week, I'll get COVID, or not? It's the fact of what. So what you're saying is making a Bayesian inference about a particular claim that then says it's bad to get that if we engage in this probabilistically overall, right? So the claim is that probabilistically, wearing masks reduces in the aggregate the spread of COVID. Right.
And that's a matter. And do you believe that? Do you believe that is a matter of fact?
I believe it as a Bayesian probabilistic claim that I would put my weight on, yes. But to say it as a matter of fact in a foundationalist truth claim sense, not that 2 + 2 = 4 kind of fact. No, it's certainly plausible. There's so much we don't know about the disease. That's a reasonable inference to best explanation given what we know, but reasonable inference to best explanation should not be, in my estimation, labeled as facts.
But in the spirit of, let me find it here.
I think it's important to distinguish between reality and fact.
Mm-hmm.
Because something is known as a fact implies that it is real. But in fact, human beings are incapable of perceiving reality as it actually is. So I get the feeling that when you talk about reality, you're talking about it as a categorical entity. That is, if it's real, that's what's out there in the world, in the universe. But we human beings are incapable of perceiving the fullness of the universe.
Correct.
I can't perceive, for instance, ultraviolet light. It's out there. I can devise instruments that will help me turn it into something that I can perceive. I think it's really important to keep a sense of humility. I'm not suggesting that you aren't. I'm suggesting for me that it's important to keep a sense of humility that I can't perceive what is actually real. I don't have the tools to do that. I can perceive something which I can share with the rest of you. We have a shared reality, but I'm not convinced that that is the absolute reality which exists above and beyond us.
I don't want to interrupt.
Go ahead, Pauline, please.
When I was, thinking about, and this is a fascinating conversation, I was struck by this idea of, beliefs, facts, reality, and all these different pieces. And I was thinking about, in clinical work, I've encountered plenty of people that have this, belief that humans are bad and they will hurt me, as the person. And it's so interesting because I was immediately taught, in doing this type of work that we have different, versions of reality, right? And so, I might be becoming too subjective in this comment, but, to my client, based on their reality, the people around you will hurt you and you have to protect yourself. And my belief is that actually people are good, circumstances impact them, and I don't have that same reality as them. But then on a more potentially, maybe we can look up some research articles on levels of violence and all of that. But I feel like that's like on an aggregate in the United States, this is the likelihood you'll be attacked, or this is the likelihood of abuse, is also that might be reality on one level, on a more scientific level, but that is not necessarily our realities. So yeah, I'm stuck on this whole reality piece and truth and, beliefs and facts, but that's sort of the idea I was thinking about, like what is then reality and is it really common ground? But maybe I'm going to be becoming too subjective.
Yeah, your example of what are people afraid of, I think is very complex. And as you're pointing out, is subjective. And you'd have to go through a lot of analysis, as you people are more skilled than I am to do that. I'm just trying to get agreement that there is at the bottom of it, there is some kind of reality there. And we're doing our best to find what it is. And that is not helpful to make claims that are falsifiable, okay? And let's go back to the masks, okay? Mm-hmm. If it's a matter of fact that wearing masks reduces the transmissibility of it, then we could talk about that. We can talk about 6 feet or 10 feet or whatever. We can talk about sneezes or coughs, what kind of mask and everything else, but they do reduce the spread. And I think there's a lot of factual information about that. And to make that claim controversial is harmful.
Right. So what I'm saying is that you're getting there's then an intersection of a multiplicity of different things to make the judgment. I wear masks all the time, and I think everybody should. What is it a fact? There's a lot of layering to facts and values and meaning and pragmatics and what it is that we ought to do in relation. So in other words, it wouldn't rock my world. So certainly if I tell somebody, this is an absolute fact, I'm certain of this, it's rare that I say, this is an absolute fact. And then my evolving understanding is, well, actually, I was completely wrong. This, what I claimed to be an absolute fact turned out not to be. And I have more or less had that experience periodically. So when we say something is an absolute fact, if you then have the asterisk, well, there's evolving understanding, so that actually, when we really look at it, what we really didn't understand was these are the dynamics that are operative. And actually, it's only for a subset of people that wearing a mask. And for you, Greg, it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever if we wear a mask. And now we know that to be the truth. Well, okay. But at least any then naive sense of realism, which is if it depends on what we're after, but then all of a sudden it's not foundationalist. It's not a foundationalist claim that you can then say, well, this is what rock solid reality is. This is our best interpretation, best inferenced explanation in a pragmatic world where we need to make cost benefit analyses. This is what we'll decide to do. So then to me, when we realize that it's that, then what goes from and I want to say, Lee, I really like your presentation as an entry into very clear, organized thinking about how to be a scientific realist. I think that part of what you're getting from me is I've been a scientific realist in the past, okay? And I built a theory of knowledge because I wasn't satisfied with scientific realism. I don't think scientific realism has a good theory of human knowers. I don't think it understands, and that creates a huge problem in trying to generate a satisfactory epistemology and ontology based on it. But it was I found it to be very easy to follow and very interesting to walk through. And obviously I have a few pieces of it that I would frame slightly differently based on my own version of reality. Other final thoughts as we get to 7 o'clock here? Any final questions or summations or?
Well, Lee, I think it was a really good presentation. Just look at all of the discussion that occurred.
Yep, it was very good.
It stimulated us.
Yeah, Lee, I'm really, really grateful. The thing that would have made me immediately in like almost full agreement with you is just backing off the absolute fact claims of some of it and maybe leaning more toward useful truths, right? To get more into that ought space. And then I think you're knocking a home run.
Okay, let me just, I believe I did not use the word certain anywhere in the talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I like a book called Thinking in Bets by a gambler called Annie Duke. Thinking in Bets is a kind of a good thing. So there's that. My thing on matters of fact, I don't know where it is. I just want to say that, don't know my own talk here. There it is. Mike is correct in saying that the shape of the Earth nearly spherical is not a scientific statement, but it's certainly heading us in the right direction. The flat earthers argue that point. There is, I think it's called Datum 1984, which is a detailed geosurvey of the Earth that's used for calculating altitudes in GPS units and all that stuff is out there. So his Mike's comments are correct that these are not scientifically accurate, but I think that the discussions that you hear or the arguments that you hear on the street are at kind of the level that I've discussed it here. I also want to mention, let me just say that one of my favorite podcasters is Sean Carroll. He has a book called The Big Picture. He describes himself as a poetic naturalist. And basically what he's saying is that he believes kind of the way I do in a real substrate. And then he's willing to go kind of to the right in Gregg's element chart. And that there are many ways, that's kind of what I try to get to with my poem analog. At one level it is ink on a page, but that's not what people go for in the poem. All those other meanings emerge at other points. Okay.
All right.
Thanks for your interest.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
And I hope, did I move the needle anywhere for anybody?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, right. I got a lot out of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I got a lot out of it.
You handled it amazingly too. It was great.
Right. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. All right. Very good. We'll see everybody
Bye, guys.
Stay,
Take care.
stay healthy.
Mhm.